Hello, I want to welcome you to the power of our story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. We are now inviting our families of the fallen to join our tribe for healing and connection. So tonight, I want to welcome Jodie Baulkham. A little bit about Jodie. She is a licensed educator, certified life and grief coach, speaker, and best-selling author of Choosing My Tomorrow, Surviving Murder, Navigating Mental Health, and Harnessing the Power of Choice. She specializes in grief coaching, resilience training, and leadership development, drawing from her personal experience as a first responder spouse and widow. Jodie has developed online courses to support those moving through grief and offers personal coaching to empower individuals to carry the weight of grief, build resilience, and live life beyond loss. Her work supports first responders, their families, and anyone navigating the complex journey of grief and mental health. You can learn more about Jodie's story by visiting her website at www.jodiebaulkham.com. Her contact information will be in the description on this video also. So please join me in welcoming Jodie as she shares some of her lessons learned and practical strategies and reminders to help navigate grief and loss. So Jodie, I am thrilled that you're here with us tonight. Thanks for coming.
There. All right. So thank you so much, Sarah, for having me with you tonight. I am really grateful to be sharing a little bit more with this group. This group has given me such a sense of comfort, and the sharing of everyone's stories about love and loss really just reinforces the fact that all of our stories, even though they're around a common theme, are all very unique to us, and that sometimes the journey through grief can be really isolating. And what we need most often is to be reminded that we don't have to do this alone. And so my story with grief started almost 18 and a half years ago, a week after my 29th birthday in the fall of 2007, when my husband, Chris, was killed in the line of duty as a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. And so I found myself raising our 8-month-old daughter alone while facing the dual challenge of traumatic grief and then the complexities of the Canadian justice system. And so I have walked this road myself, and through both personal experience and education, and now working with others, I've learned lessons that have helped me move forward over these years. And I describe my healing journey in my book, Choosing My Tomorrow. And I recount that growth and that development and some of the lessons that I learned. And that's what I'm looking forward to sharing with you tonight. And so I'm going to offer some practical strategies for wherever you are on your grief journey, whether that is something recent and fresh or we've been walking this path for some time. And if you'd like to explore any of these things a little further after today, I've got available resources on my website. But for now, I just invite you to, breathe, settle in, know that this is a safe and a brave space, and you are welcome here exactly as you are. And because of the group that we're in tonight, we know lesson number one, right? That grief is complex and it is messy. And there are days where we feel okay, and then something happens and we're taken out at the knees. And more often than not, we might question, whether or not we're doing this right. Or we find ourselves laughing and smiling, and then guilt hits us because are we allowed to feel this way? Wherever we are in our grief journey and whatever feelings and emotions are coming up, I want to remind you that they are valid and that they are very typical for someone moving through this process. And that suppressing your emotions or pretending that you are okay when you are not contributes to a harder journey along the way. And so I really want to offer you permission to experience anything that is coming up during the grief process, whether that is anger or guilt or sadness or joy. And I've kind of broken the strategies that I'm going to share into two parts. Those for those people who are early in their grief journey, and for those of us who have been walking this road for a while. And so, as it relates to grief for those in the early stages, right? You are in shock. You might be in denial. You were living the life yesterday with all of the people intact that you loved the most, and today they're no longer there. So, grief in the early days is so incredibly overwhelming, and there is a sense of, I have control over nothing right now. When you're in these moments, I want you to try to remember, as you're working your way through each and every day and every moment, what feels manageable for you today. Is that changing your clothes? Is that brushing your teeth? Is it maybe going outside for some air or replying to one of the messages that's coming in? If you are able to have a sense of control over something and hold on to that, I found that seems to help as we move forward. And then not saying that we're okay when we're not. We are often conditioned when someone asks, "How are you?" You quickly say, "I'm fine." We are not fine in this stage of grief. And so, really giving yourself visual cues and reminders to let you know that it's okay to not be okay as you're moving through these very, very difficult times. For those of us that have walked the road a little longer and are living with grief, right? It visits us still as unpredictably as it did in the early days. And so when this is happening, also stepping into acknowledge that grief is visiting today and to honor the feelings that are coming up for you. I often found that the anticipation of special events and days was actually worse for me than the day itself. And with that awareness, I started to prepare things for birthdays and anniversaries in advance so that would ease some of my anxiety moving forward. And so my daughter and I bake a special cake every year on Chris's birthday. And then we light candles for every year that he's been an angel with us. And so, whatever that is for you, I want you to try to think about those things and have special moments around different days that are important to you, because there's no finish line in grief, right? It's just something that we learn to carry and we live alongside. And throughout that process, the more we're able to step into reflection and acknowledgement, I have found personally the easier it was for me to make different choices. And that leads me to my second lesson of taking time for self discovery. Grief makes you often feel like you don't know who you are, right? You've lost a sense of yourself when you've lost the person that you love. And so you don't recognize who you are anymore. And you might wonder, who am I now? What does this mean for me? What does my future hold? And it can be hard to know what you need, let alone what are the things that bring you joy. And so you often have this sense of, I feel stuck in my old life, but I'm walking around in this new reality, right? And your time is often split between this was life before my loss and this was life after. And so it's the most painful part of our process, in my experience, is when we're in that space because it is so confusing and so chaotic. And so, what I have found helpful is to think about self discovery, not about fixing yourself, but about gently getting to know yourself again. And so, for those of us that are in the early stages of grief, right, actually checking in and writing down, what am I feeling? What do I need? And you may not know what this is right away, but if you're in the habit of actually setting aside time to check in with yourself, that habit can serve you very well into the future, as well as boundary setting. I found in the early stages of grief with so many things going on and my energy was completely like depleted, saying no or asking for space was my way of protecting my energy in order to be able to support myself and my daughter, because at this stage we really are in survival mode. And so another thing that I tried was stepping into something that is new. When we try something new that is a different experience than some of the things that we used to do with the person that we've lost, I found that the sense of Comfort is different. Even though I enjoy doing the same activities with Chris and I could do them alone, that absence made it feel even greater. So, trying something new, listening to different kinds of music, just kind of experimenting at this time to see what brings me comfort. Because I found that it was about exploring what I what met my need in that moment, not about rushing into something new. And so I started small, I did a lot of breathing, and I paid attention to what felt good and what felt heavy in order to protect that energy and try to give me comfort in that time. For those of us who have been living with grief, right? What your grief looks like shapes over time. You may need to revisit your goals or your dreams or your boundaries. Like what worked in the beginning may no longer serve you. And also, your self care often evolves. And so, what used to feel supportive may no longer be enough, or it might not fit you right now. So, revisiting what feels most comfortable and that fits into your life at the current moment is really important. And so, how each person integrates this part of the process into their daily life differs. It also changes as we move through our grief journey. And so, identifying what is supportive for each person is the focus of my one on one coaching. But I encourage you to think about one area in your life that you would find supportive and reflect on what that could look like. Because you are allowed to grow and you are allowed to change. It doesn't mean like you're leaving. It doesn't mean that you're leaving anything behind. Stop taking things personally is so much easier said than done, and I acknowledge that. But when we are grieving, our emotions are very raw. And so when other people seem to be lashing out or pulling away or seeming distant, we'll often think that it's something that we did wrong. Right? Grief makes us extra sensitive to rejection, for example, and we can easily internalize things that are not ours to carry. Mel Robbins has made this phenomenon a little bit more popular right now with the let them theory. But what she's saying is, other people are in control of their responses and you're in control of yours. And when people are acting out, it really is more about their pain and discomfort than anything that you had done personally. And so, for those of us that are in the early grief stages, thinking about reaffirming that this is about them, not about me, as a reminder, or creating a simple boundary that I'm choosing not to carry this and kind of saying that out loud or in your mind or reading it on an affirmation card. You can be compassionate without taking responsibility for what else is going on with someone else. And for those of us who are living with grief a little bit longer, you might notice that you're still holding some emotional weight from the past, some things that people said or did that you did internalize during that time. And so I encourage you to make time to write down what are you still carrying and asking yourself, how is this serving me? Like, do I want to keep a hold of this? Right? And then releasing that. And releasing it doesn't mean that the hurt didn't exist, but it does mean that you're choosing to set it down and not let it impact you anymore into the future. Asking questions that support communication. So, grief brings those intense emotions to the surface, and sometimes we lash out or we snap. I've snapped, I've become defensive. And why is that? Because I'm hurting. And so when we are responding from a place of hurt, sometimes that can sound like accusation. Sometimes it can sound like judgment, like, why didn't you do this? Right? What we really want is for them to step into, comfort us, and build that connection in order to advance our healing journey. We don't want to be confrontational, but that's seemingly kind of how autopilot may have had us running. And so it's like, how can I think differently in order to shift my tone? And so for those of you, us in early grief, when you feel yourself getting defensive, I encourage you to pause and take a breath before responding, right? And then try to lead with curiosity instead of frustration. Like, help me understand what's going on or why you said this or where you were, whatever the case may be. And if you feel like you're too worked up, write your question down first, because sometimes that has the ability to soften the tone and create space for a really meaningful conversation. For those of us that have been living with grief, right? Notice if a defensive communication style has stuck with you from your early grief days, because sometimes this becomes habitual even after the acute phase has passed. And so practice slowing down your conversations and using phrases that are curious, like, I'm wondering if we can talk about this, in order to have more of an open dialogue with people in your life. And to support open dialogue, I'm going to talk about using helpful language. The word grief, it's only 5 letters long. It is very short, but the levels of emotion that encompass those 5 letters are just immense. And sometimes we just end up saying that we're sad or we're angry. But underneath that, there's often a sense of loneliness or guilt or disappointment. It runs much deeper. And so when we can't accurately name what we're feeling, then we can't ask accurately for what we need in order to support us. And so a tool I'd like to offer, that what I used regularly, was the feelings wheel. And this helps you to find the right words so that people can actually support you. And so I encourage people in the early stages of grief to check in with themselves regularly. Like, moment to moment, things can change when we're in the early stages of grief. So, what am I feeling right now? What then do I need in that moment? And when you start to talk about your feelings, then you can say, I feel, instead of focusing on what someone did or did not do, right? It's not about what they did or didn't do. It's about how it made you feel and what you need to be supported after that. So naming your feelings gives other people a chance to support you in a helpful way. And it's not easy, but when you can name it, then you can start to work with it. And so for those of us that have been living with grief, I encourage you to consider, am I still labeling my grief in the same way? Have I defaulted to say that I am sad when there are actually more emotions that are more complex that you might want to start to dive into a little bit? And then consider whether your emotional language has stayed stuck or if it needs to evolve to the place that you are now. And so, with identifying your feelings and asking for what you need, that leads into the next lesson of speaking authentically. So, you're communicating honestly to say what you mean and then ask for what you need. And we often have a hard time doing this because we put on a mask. We say that we're fine when we're not, because we're worried that people are going to think that we're a burden or that they don't get it. And so we shut down, or we just superficially engage with people without actually letting them know how we really are doing. And because it's often easier to hide behind these things than step into that space of vulnerability. But speaking authentically is where connection and healing has the best opportunity to happen. And so in the beginning, right, I encourage you to find someone that you trust and start to say, I feel and I need, right? And then practice maybe saying some phrases as they respond to you, like honestly saying, I'm not fine, but I keep showing up, right? Or I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need some space, right? You don't have to share everything with everyone, but you do deserve to be heard. And so I encourage you to stop pretending. For those of us who are living with grief a little longer, ask yourself, are you still hiding? Right? Even though time passes, we will often minimize our grief to make other people more comfortable. And so, even years later, allowing yourself to say, today's not a great day, or I would love a little bit of extra support right now. Can we go for a walk? Right? Authenticity doesn't expire, and neither does grief. So, really be true to yourself and be true to the people that are best able to support you. And those are the people who you will confide in and who you will build trust with, right? Having someone you can talk to without fear of judgment is life-giving, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect start to a conversation, but just let's get started. And so, for those of you in the early stages of grief, making a short list of 2 or 3 people that might be these people for you. And often people will be like, talk to your family. For me personally, that was very difficult. Those weren't my people in that moment where I felt the safest to talk about things honestly, because they were so close to Chris that they were going through their own grieving process. And so we weren't able to gel when it came to what each of us needed. So, whoever that is for you, you are the best person to make that call and that judgment, but find them. If talking to someone feels a little bit too difficult, you can write down your feelings for yourself, or start with a text or a voice note. Or if you want to practice, you can work with a coach or a friend, in order to be able to work on the words that are required for you to articulate what it is that you need to. Right. And that space can be held without any pressure or expectation, so that when you do get into conversations with folks that are closer to you, it's a little bit more easy for you to do so. And for those of us that have been living with grief a little bit longer, the cut you out at your knees doesn't happen every day all the time, but there are days when grief is heavier. And so you might want occasional check ins with someone, and they still do make a difference. And so make sure you have someone who you know is going to be able to hold space for you, that's not going to rush you. And it's okay to return to professional support as life shifts and evolves. And so just giving yourself that permission again when it comes up, to draw on the supports that are most helpful for you. Appreciate all your days, right? I like to say that there are good days and better days, and to appreciate them all. I did not start out this way, but it is wisdom that I have learned about how to interact with my reality that I have found very helpful. Because grief can sometimes make good days feel very uncomfortable, right? Because some days feel so heavy. When you finally have a good day, that guilt creeps in. And you might wonder, like, what does this feeling mean? Like, does this mean I'm moving on, or that I'm forgetting, or that I love them less? You don't, right? I want you to think about how joy and pain from grief can exist at the same time. You are allowed to laugh, and you are allowed to enjoy small moments, even while you're realizing that your loved one is no longer able to share them physically with you. And so, for those of you moving through the early days of grief, I know that this is incredibly difficult, but I want you to write down one good thing each day, right? This set a 2-minute timer, to notice small things. I wasn't sure I was going to include it because sometimes it's very difficult to sit with yourself, for that long in the early stages. But I think it's really important to help you to start to notice things in your space, because you're typically walking around numb and in a blur. You've moved from point A to point B and you don't even remember how you got there. And so this is just to help you actually notice, and be present for a couple of minutes. And so if you were drinking tea, is it good? Is it hot? Does it taste good? Is sunlight coming through a window? Just noticing your environment around you. And it's not about forcing gratitude, but giving your permission to notice that there's still things in your reality and that bring you a little bit of comfort. And it's leaning into those things for more minutes a day. And then those days will turn into more days in a month, and just going forward in that way. So allowing a little bit of joy without guilt to accompany you on this journey. And for those of us that are living with grief, right? Creating intentional gratitude rituals around specific dates. I had talked about that before. Or realizing that joy is not a betrayal, and that is actually part of the healing process as you walk along in your journey. And so asking yourself, what does joy look like for me now or in this season of life? And allow that answer to change and evolve over time. Talk regularly about mental health. Grief can blur the lines between sadness and deeper mental health struggles, and it's hard to tell kind of what's grief sometimes and what may be more. But the more that we normalize these conversations, the less power that stigma has over us. And in our communities, especially, we know the incredible negative impact that stigma has on the mental health of our loved ones. And so, if we're able to break that for ourselves and encourage other people to break down their ideas about stigma, it's not only going to help ourselves individually, but it will help shift the dialogue for the communities that our loved ones and protectors are serving in. And so, if you are in the early stages of grief, I want you to think about checking in regularly with yourself and how are you doing really, and honestly answering, not trying to mask what that looks like. And then normalize saying, I'm not okay right now. I'm trying, but I might need more support, or I'm showing up, but these days are hard. I might need a little bit of help. So that allows other people to come in to support and offer that genuine connection that could help you as you move further down that road. And for those of us that have been living with grief for a while, right? Checking in regularly again. What is supportive for me now? How has that changed? Right? And creating that plan. Who are your people, right? Who are you confiding in? Is it time to maybe have another session with someone or joining groups like this, right? Where long-term stories are welcome, right? The time that we have in this space on Wednesday nights validates our experiences in a way that our everyday life and the people that surround us every day often don't. And so stepping into that, and when we're able to step into that, that actually brings me to this lesson that hope can save a life. Like when we are in the depths of grief, hope can feel impossible, right? We might wonder how we're going to make it through or what our story can offer to somebody else. But like Sarah talks about, like our stories matter even when we're still figuring stuff out. And so, in the early stages of grief, consider sharing a part of your story with someone that you trust, or writing it down for yourself if sharing it out loud feels too big. But when we are brave enough to speak, then we're able to give other people that same permission to keep going. And so, grief groups online like this one, we help each other feel less alone, and our stories have a lot of weight with each other. When people are living with grief for a little bit longer, that's when our stories can offer hope to other people, right? It might be through peer support or through writing, or many of you volunteer, or simply just being a person that gets it. And just thinking that your story, it's not frozen in time, it's growing with you. And so you don't have to be fully healed, because in reality, we never will be. We will always be works in progress. We just need to be real. And so the hope that you're offering through your story can save others, but it can also save your own life. And then finally, being open to seeking professional help. The professional support that I received changed everything for me because it helped me to find the words to describe what I was feeling and then build that confidence to step into my new reality. Because grief can like make you feel stuck, like no one gets it, but you don't have to figure this out on your own. And so in the beginning, I mean, I started small, a few calls here and there with people. I did a couple of sessions. You don't need to commit to this forever. But even years now, I call it my grief tune-up. There are professional coaches and therapists that I go to in order to get that different level of support as different things are shifting in my life. And so it's okay to continuously or continually access that support when you need it. And so it's not just for the beginning, it's something that we can come back to whenever we need to. And so for tonight, I want you to think about some of these lessons and pick a couple that resonated the most with you. Maybe two that you could think about implementing today, maybe two for the next week, and two from a month from now. And just thinking about how are you showing up? How are you feeling? How are you engaging in this grief journey of yours? And so grief is hard and it is complicated, but you don't have to travel it alone. You have support, you have choice, and like I highlight in my book, you have the ability to harness your power of choice and choose how this next chapter will unfold. And so I love keeping these conversations going. If you want to learn more about my free resources or my course offerings and coaching services, I encourage you to visit my website or follow along with me on Instagram and LinkedIn. Sarah, I thank you for the opportunity to share with the group tonight, and I look forward to our conversation afterwards.
Jodie, thank you so much. Those were really important nuggets. So important that can make all the difference in grief. And so well shared too. So well shared. Um, I thank you for coming on. I thank all of you who are watching. I hope that you will muster up that courage to just take a small step forward, that can make such a difference in your life when you have somebody walking with you in your grief journey. So, thank you so much. And I will have all the details in the description. Thanks again, Jodie.